The battlefield was a symphony of destruction. Ships, once sleek and imposing, now twisted in the cold expanse of space, their hulks flashing with the remnants of failed shields and ruptured engines. The Zithraxian Empire had launched a devastating surprise attack on the Terran Alliance's supply route, an act of aggression that had thrown the galaxy into chaos. Human forces, outnumbered and outgunned, fought fiercely to protect what remained of their civilization. Admiral Marcus Delane stood on the bridge of the Courageous, his eyes scanning the tactical display. The situation was grim. The Zithraxian fleet had overwhelmed the outer defenses, and the enemy ships were closing in on the last human stronghold, the colony world of Terralise 9. But even in the face of certain defeat, the humans fought with a fury that had become their trademark, each battle an act of defiance. In the midst of the chaos, a distress signal broke through the static. It was coming from the surface of Terralise 9, an emergency beacon from a civilian transport ship. The coordinates indicated it was in the heart of the battlefield, surrounded by enemy vessels. "Sir, we've locked onto the signal," Lieutenant Vance reported, his voice tight with urgency. "The transport is in the midst of a firefight. They won't last long if we don't act fast." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Prepare a retrieval team. We'll go in ourselves." The Courageous shifted its trajectory, darting toward the planet's atmosphere. The shuttle bay doors opened, and Marcus, accompanied by a team of elite Marines, boarded a dropship. The descent was violent, the atmosphere crackling with the energy of combat. Outside, the sky was darkened by smoke, debris, and the flashes of plasma fire from the battle raging above. As they broke through the clouds, Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. The transport ship, the Vanguard, was a sitting target, its engines disabled and drifting toward the planet's surface. Enemy fighters circled it like vultures, eager to finish what had been started. "Get us close, Lieutenant," Marcus barked. "We don't have much time." The dropship's engines screamed as they accelerated, weaving between blasts of enemy fire. They touched down with a bone-jarring impact on the wreckage of the Vanguard. The hatch slammed open, and the Marines poured out, weapons raised, their eyes scanning for threats. Amid the chaos, a single figure appeared from the wreckage. A woman, barely conscious, her dark hair matted with blood, her uniform torn and scorched. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. She was human, but she didn't look like any officer he had seen before. There was something in her eyes, an intensity, a focus that seemed out of place for someone who had just survived such a brutal attack. "Over here," one of the Marines shouted, pulling the woman to her feet. Marcus rushed forward, crouching beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. The woman's lips trembled as she looked up at him, her eyes barely open. I'm not sure," she gasped. "But you're here, you're saving us." "We're getting you out of here," Marcus said firmly, though his mind was already racing. This wasn't just a simple rescue anymore. Something about this woman, her presence, her strength, was calling to him, like a whisper he couldn't ignore. They hurried back to the dropship, the woman's hand gripping Marcus's as they moved through the wreckage. As they took off, the shuttle doors closed, and they rocketed back toward the Courageous, the shuttle's engines roaring against the pull of gravity. On board, the woman was quickly treated by the medical team. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her than met the eye. She wasn't just a survivor. There was a fire in her that made her stand out from the countless others he had seen die in battle. She wasn't just saved. She had a purpose. Hours later, in the Courageous Command Center, Marcus found himself standing before the woman again. She had been cleaned up, her injuries patched, but there was an aura about her, an unspoken strength. She stood tall, as though she had already accepted her fate in this war. "I owe you my life," she said, her voice steady. "But there's more to this war than just surviving. You know that, don't you?" Marcus studied her for a moment, trying to place her. She was no ordinary civilian. "Who are you?" "My name is Elara," she replied, her gaze never wavering. "And I am the one who will unite the scattered human colonies. You may have saved me today, Admiral, but I will be the one who leads humanity into the future." The words struck Marcus like a thunderclap. He could feel the weight of them, the gravity in her tone. It was as if a switch had been flipped within her, and she had become something more than just a survivor. She had become the embodiment of humanity's unyielding resolve. A leader, perhaps the leader they so desperately needed in these darkest of times. In the days that followed, Marcus watched as Elara's influence grew. Her words, though few, were powerful. She spoke of unity, of strength through adversity, and of humanity's place in the galaxy. People listened. Officers, soldiers, civilians, even the colonies that had once been fractured by politics. She was their beacon, their guiding light. It wasn't long before Marcus realized something he hadn't anticipated. Elara was destined for far more than just leading a few troops. She would shape the very future of the Terran Alliance. Her ability to unite people, to inspire them, was unparalleled. She was not just a leader by circumstance. She was a force of nature. And all of it started with a single act of mercy. One that had no way of knowing it would ignite the spark of a revolution. As the war raged on, Marcus stood by her side, watching her rise. He had saved her from the chaos, never suspecting that she would be the one to shape the future of humanity. But now, he saw it clearly. Elara wasn't just a survivor. She was the leader who would bring humanity to the forefront of the galaxy, not by brute force, but by the unbreakable will to create a future worth fighting for. And he had played his part, unknowingly, by saving her from the very chaos that would shape them both. The future was hers to command. Months passed, and Elara's influence continued to spread like wildfire. What had started as a spark of hope, ignited in the flames of battle, was now a burning beacon for all of humanity. Under her guidance, the fragmented colonies began to unite in a way no one had thought possible. Old rivalries were set aside as Elara's message of unity, strength, and purpose resonated through the deepest reaches of human space. Marcus watched as Elara spoke to the people, her voice a soothing but powerful force that seemed to transcend the noise of war. She was no longer just the woman he had saved that day on Terralise 9. She had become the face of a movement. Her vision was clear. A united human front that would rise above its fractured past and meet the galaxy with a strength that no one could ignore. But even as humanity's future began to take shape, shadows lingered in the distance. The Zithraxian Empire, angered by their failed attempt to crush humanity, wasn't finished. They were regrouping, rearming, and preparing to strike again. This time with a force that would be impossible to ignore. Elara knew this well. One evening, as the Courageous made its way through a particularly dangerous stretch of space, an area long known as the Void of Forgotten Empires, Marcus stood on the bridge, gazing out at the void. The stars shimmered like distant, untouchable hopes. Elara, he said softly, his voice carrying a mix of respect and concern. She had come to stand beside him, her gaze locked on the same vast expanse of space. You've done more than any of us expected. Humanity is changing, and I can see the power in your vision. She smiled, but it was a weary smile. We're not there yet. The Zithraxians are still out there. They're watching, waiting. This war it's far from over, Marcus. What I've created isn't some temporary shield. It's a foundation, but the storm is coming. Marcus turned to her, studying her carefully. And you're ready for that storm? Elara's eyes were intense, but there was a quiet confidence in them. I've been ready since the first attack. Every step I've taken has led to this moment. We can't outrun the Zithraxians by running. We'll face them head-on. We'll show them why humanity cannot be broken. Her resolve was clear, but there was a weight behind her words, a burden she had chosen to carry. Marcus knew she wasn't just talking about winning a war. She was talking about ensuring humanity's future in a galaxy where they were once seen as weak and insignificant. It was more than strategy now. It was survival. As the days passed, preparations for the inevitable confrontation began. Elara's leadership transformed not just the military strategy, but the very essence of how humans viewed themselves. They weren't just soldiers, cowering behind defense lines. They were a force of nature, forged in the fires of battle, and they would make the galaxy take notice. Elara stood before a holographic map one evening, her hands resting lightly on the console as she surveyed the positions of the Zithraxian fleet, still scattered but closing in. The human fleet, once dwarfed by the sheer size of their enemies, was now an organized, well-equipped force with one singular purpose: to stop the Zythraxians before they could annihilate any more of humanity's colonies. "We can't afford to be reactive anymore," Elara said to the gathered fleet commanders. "We're going to make a stand." At Andras 4, Marcus raised an eyebrow. Andras 4 was a small, but strategic planet on the edge of human space. Its defenses were minimal, and it had little military value. To an outsider, it would have seemed like an odd choice for a final stand. "Why Andras 4? Marcus asked, voicing the question that was on everyone's mind. Elara's gaze hardened. "Because the Zythraxians think it's unimportant. They'll underestimate us, and that will be their downfall. We'll force them to come to us, and when they do, we'll hit them with everything we've got." The plan was risky, but it was the kind of move that made Marcus understand exactly why Elara had become the leader she was. She had an uncanny ability to predict her enemies' every move, to turn their assumptions against them. The Zythraxians thought themselves the masters of the galaxy. Elara was about to show them that they had underestimated humanity in the worst way possible. The battle for Andras 4 was fierce and brutal. The Zythraxian fleet arrived in full force, confident that the planet's defenses would crumble under the weight of their might. They were wrong. The human forces, under Elara's command, launched a surprise counteroffensive from all sides. Ships that had once been thought of as outclassed or obsolete now tore through the Zythraxian formations with brutal efficiency. Humanity's ingenuity, the ability to adapt on the fly, had never been more evident. In the thick of the battle, Marcus found himself coordinating with Elara from the command center of the Courageous. The tides of war had shifted, but it was still touch and go. "Admiral, our flanks are holding," said Lieutenant Vance. "But the Zythraxians are relentless. We need backup, or we'll be overwhelmed." Elara's calm voice cut through the tension. "We've trained for this. The Zythraxians won't break us. Marcus, get our reserves to the southern quadrant. Now." He didn't need to ask why. She had already seen what he had missed. The southern quadrant was where the Zythraxian fleet's most powerful ships were gathering. They were preparing for a final push, but they hadn't accounted for the new tactics the humans had adopted. Marcus relayed the orders, sending their reserve forces to intercept. For hours, the battle raged on. Explosions filled the air, and the sky above Andras 4 burned with the fury of war. But slowly, the Zythraxians began to falter. Their coordinated efforts were crumbling as human forces pushed them back, one strategic move at a time. Then came the moment when the tide finally turned. The Zythraxian flagship, a massive warship designed for dominance, was disabled in a surprise maneuver that sent shockwaves through the enemy fleet. Without their command structure, the Zythraxians began to panic, their formations breaking apart. "Admiral, the Zythraxians are retreating," Vance shouted, his voice filled with disbelief. Marcus turned to Elara, his eyes wide with admiration. She had done it. She had led them to victory. But Elara wasn't celebrating. Her gaze remained fixed on the fleeing enemy ships, her thoughts already shifting forward. "We've won this battle," she said, "but the war is far from over. We've shown the galaxy who we are, and now we need to show them who we can become." As the human fleet regrouped, Marcus couldn't help but feel the enormity of the moment. Elara had become the leader she was always meant to be. Not just a savior, but a symbol of humanity's resilience, its refusal to ever back down. She had saved humanity, not just from the Zythraxians, but from the very idea that they were powerless. And in doing so, she had set them on a path to lead the stars. Humanity's future, it seemed, was no longer something to be feared. It was something to be embraced. And under Elara's guidance, the galaxy would know it was coming for them all. As the weeks passed after the victory at Andras 4, the Terran Alliance was a different entity. The battle had been more than just a triumph over the Zythraxians. It was the symbolic moment that galvanized humanity, uniting them into something far greater than the sum of their parts. Elara's words echoed in every corner of human space. "We are no longer a fractured species. We are humanity, and we will shape our own destiny." The military followed her lead, adopting new tactics, technologies, and strategies that had once seemed impossible. The Zythraxians were still a formidable threat, but humanity's ability to adapt, innovate, and push forward was proving to be their greatest weapon. Marcus found himself at Elara's side more than ever. He had always been a soldier, a tactician, and a leader in his own right. But under Elara, he felt like a small part of something much larger, something monumental. Her presence was magnetic, her every move calculated, and yet, there was a warmth in her that inspired those around her. People didn't just follow her because they had to. They followed her because they believed in her, because they believed in what she was building. One evening, Marcus entered the command center of the Courageous, where Elara stood alone, her gaze fixed on a holographic map of the galaxy. The war with the Zythraxians was not yet won, but they had gained a critical upper hand. The next phase of their campaign was already being planned, a series of coordinated strikes that would destabilize the Zythraxian Empire for good. "Still working, huh?" Marcus said, stepping up beside her. Elara didn't look at him immediately. She was focused, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There's always something more to do," she said quietly. "The Zythraxians may have lost a major fleet, but they won't stay down for long. They'll regroup, and when they do, they'll strike back harder." He nodded, understanding the weight she carried. Elara's ability to see beyond the present, to anticipate the next move of their enemies, was both a gift and a burden. She had never shied away from it, but he knew it left little room for rest. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked, leaning over the map. "We're still not sure where their next push will come from. They'll try to isolate us, I'm certain of it," Elara said, her voice calm but firm. "They'll target our supply lines, our vulnerable colonies, trying to make us stretch too thin. We need to preemptively strike. Hit them where they least expect it. Force them into a corner." "You're talking about going on the offensive," Marcus said, a sense of excitement creeping into his voice. The idea of taking the fight to the enemy was something he could get behind. "Where?" "Voar Station," she said, her eyes narrowing as she projected the location on the map. It was an old, nearly abandoned research station on the edge of Zythraxian space. Voar had once been a hub for deep space technology, but after the Zythraxians had begun their campaign of conquest, the station had been left to rot. It wasn't strategically important, not at first glance. But to Elara, it was the perfect target. "I'll get the fleet in motion," Marcus said, his voice already shifting into military mode. "We'll hit them hard." The operation was swift and decisive. The Courageous led the charge, flanked by the newly reformed human fleet, the Alliance's vessels now a true force to be reckoned with. As they approached Voar Station, they encountered no immediate resistance. But Elara had predicted this. The Zythraxians were too distracted, too focused on their own rebuilding efforts to notice the human fleet closing in. Marcus watched from the bridge as the first waves of fighters launched, their engines roaring as they tore through space, closing the gap between the station and their enemies. The Courageous cannons opened fire, and within moments, the station's defenses began to crumble. "This is too easy," Marcus muttered, though his instincts told him not to be complacent. "They'll come," Elara said, her eyes scanning the station's exterior. "They're just waiting for us to think we've won." As if on cue, the Zythraxian response came. A sudden, violent barrage of fire from cloaked ships, hidden in the shadows. The battle erupted in an instant, the skies above Voar Station filled with plasma and missile trails. But the humans were ready. Their tactics had evolved, their unity making them a more formidable force than any of their enemies had anticipated. But just as the battle seemed to reach its peak, a new threat emerged. A massive Zythraxian warship, far larger than any they had seen before, dropped out of hyperspace, flanked by a fleet of smaller vessels. Its dark silhouette loomed like a predator in the night. "Damn it! We didn't anticipate this," Marcus said, his voice tinged with frustration. Elara's gaze was unwavering, her mind already racing through options. "It's a trap. They were waiting for us to overextend. But we won't give them that satisfaction." With practiced precision, she gave the orders. The human fleet pivoted, their ships scattering into coordinated defensive formations. The Zythraxians attempted to encircle them, but Elara was one step ahead. Her tactics were brilliant, predictive, fast, and decisive. She had learned from every skirmish, every battle, and it showed. In the chaos of the battle, Marcus found himself in the thick of it, leading a group of Marines in a boarding operation against the Zithraxian warship. The plan was risky, but if they could disable the flagship from the inside, the rest of the fleet would collapse. As they boarded the warship, fighting their way through narrow, metallic corridors, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the war was turning in their favor. They were no longer just surviving. They were fighting to win. Finally, they reached the heart of the ship, the bridge, where the Zithraxian command awaited. It was a bloodbath. Human soldiers fought their way through waves of alien warriors, their weapons cutting through armor like paper. At the center of the chaos stood Elara, her presence like a beacon of focus and determination. She had led them here, and now it was time to end the fight. With one final push, they reached the command center. Elara stepped forward, her voice cold but steady. "This ends now," she declared, as the Zithraxian commander, once so certain of victory, surrendered before her. The battle for Voar Station was won, but Marcus knew this was just the beginning. Elara had shown humanity that they were not a species to be trifled with. The Zithraxians had underestimated them, and now they would learn the true cost of crossing humanity. As the war continued, Marcus realized that Elara was no longer just the leader of a resistance. She was the architect of a new age for humanity, and under her leadership, they would never be defeated again. Humanity's future was no longer uncertain. It was in their hands, and they would shape it. As the human forces secured Voar Station, the galaxy watched in stunned silence. The Zithraxians, their flagship reduced to scrap metal, retreated in disarray, leaving behind a trail of broken ships and shattered pride. Elara's gamble had paid off. But in the aftermath, as the human fleet began its victory lap, Marcus couldn't help but feel the weight of what lay ahead. The Zithraxians were only one piece of the puzzle. There were still the countless alien factions that had watched humanity from the shadows, unsure of what the humans were capable of. In the quiet moments after the battle, Marcus found himself back on the Courageous, looking out at the expanse of space. The stars were just as beautiful as ever, but now they felt different. No longer the distant beacons of hope, but the battlegrounds for humanity's future. Elara joined him at the viewport, her eyes just as fixed on the cosmos. "You've done it," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Elara's gaze softened, but there was no smile on her face. "We've done it. This isn't just my victory, Marcus. It's humanity's. All of us." He nodded, knowing she had never sought personal glory, but he couldn't help but admire her. She had risen to the occasion in ways no one had ever expected, even her. She was the leader who had saved humanity, who had united fractured colonies and factions into a singular, unstoppable force. But the war was far from over. "What's next?" Marcus asked. Elara turned toward him, her eyes gleaming with the same determination that had gotten them this far. "We rebuild. We reclaim. And we remind the galaxy that humanity is not to be trifled with." It was a plan she had already set in motion. The Alliance would continue to push forward, but now with new purpose. Voar Station was merely the beginning of humanity's new strategy, taking back what was theirs and ensuring that they were never again seen as weak or unworthy of respect. In the coming weeks, humanity's borders began to expand again, slowly but surely. Elara's leadership was no longer a hopeful ideal. It was a reality that others were now forced to reckon with. The human fleet, bolstered by the knowledge and resources they had gained from the Zithraxian warship, grew stronger, more agile, and more powerful. As for the Zithraxians, they were no longer the unstoppable empire they had once been. After their defeat at Voar, their cohesion faltered. Elara had shown them that humanity was a force to be reckoned with, and the Zithraxian Empire would never be the same again. But the real shift came when the first Galactic Summit was convened in the aftermath of the war. Representatives from every known species and faction came to the table. Most were there out of necessity. Humanity's rapid rise had forced them to recognize the new power in the galaxy. Elara attended the summit, flanked by Marcus and the key leaders of the Terran Alliance. As she stood before the assembly, the hum of anticipation filled the air. It was her moment, the moment when humanity would officially take its place among the stars. She spoke not as a conqueror, but as a leader who had united her people against a common enemy and had delivered them to this new age. Our strength is not just in our weapons, or our tactics, or our fleets, Elara said, her voice carrying across the hall, every word laced with resolve. It is in our unity, in our spirit. We are humanity, and we will lead by example. We will build a galaxy where cooperation and understanding are the foundations of peace. But we will not be passive. We will defend our future with everything we have. The room was silent as she spoke, but her words resonated deeply. There was no denying the truth in them. Humanity was not a species that would bow down. They were no longer the underdogs, the fragile newcomers. They had become the lifeline for the galaxy, a symbol of resilience, innovation, and strength. After the summit, as Elara and Marcus walked through the corridors of the Alliance's flagship, Marcus couldn't help but look at her with awe. "You've done it," he repeated, his voice filled with admiration. "You've changed everything." Elara smiled, but there was no arrogance in her expression, only a quiet, humble acceptance of the weight of her role. "No," she said softly, "we've done it. All of us." And as they looked out at the stars, now not just as explorers, but as the architects of the galaxy's future, Marcus knew that Elara's vision had become their reality. Humanity would no longer be mere survivors in a galaxy of predators. They would be the leaders, the warriors, the creators of a future that would echo across the stars for eons to come. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity was not just a species to be saved. It was the species that would save them all. With Elara at the helm, they would not just survive the chaos of the stars, they would master it.